anyway, it should be. Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Today we're going to be doing a master's study, Frank Frazetta, and he is usually known for doing these amazing oil paintings that have to do with fantasy and science fiction subjects, comic books, sci-fi, fantasy novels and stuff, but today we're going to be doing something that has to do with, well, it's going to be a watercolor piece, so I am not going to be working in oil. As you know, I don't work in oil. But it's going to be just as exciting as if we were doing an oil painting, because we're using one of his paintings that looks like it was done either in watercolor or gouache or a thin oil. So hopefully we'll do that. I spent a lot of time, I think maybe more than 2 hours, doing a sketch real quick. And the sketch here was done just with some purple watercolor. So I'm going to be using my Gansai Tambi watercolor pans today, and these are an inexpensive brand that I have, but so I got a box of I think 32 colors or so for $29, really cheap on Amazon. So I'm going to be working with these colors today, and the 4 colors I'll be using are going to be pretty much in keeping with the color scheme for his piece that we'll be working on today. And this is a Tarzan piece. I think Elijah's going to paste a link to the original image of that so that you guys can check that out, because I totally would like you guys to have the opportunity to look at a reference when it's available. So in this case it is available, and so we'll be doing that. So let me just show you the tools we'll be using today before we get going. So first of all, I'm working in my watercolor journal. It's the same watercolor journal that we've worked in numerous times for the stream, and I believe the size on this officially is a 5x8 landscape is what it is. And I'm going to go back to the thing that that's just the shells, some more of it from the other day, but that's not what we're working on today. That's Mr. Chicken, and here we are. So today we're going to be working on the Frazetta study, and I've been trying to use these journals up, so once they're gone I'll be working on Arches paper, so that's just to let you guys know in case you're wondering if you'll ever stop seeing this journal. But we've done a lot of projects in it, so we're doing a 5x8 piece on this, and horizontally it actually takes up more space, but we're doing it in a vertical landscape. If you go and look at the actual piece, you'll see that it's Tarzan hanging off of a limb looking at some lost city over there. There's a waterfall and some kind of a gorge area over here, and then a cliff with a branch, and that's what I ended up painting with some purple watercolor. It's not quite a grisaille because there's not really as much attention to values as there could be. It's more of just a sketch in purple. It's almost like a ghost grisaille, and I did that just with a little bit of purple. It's the number 38 in the set, and I ended up just using that just for the ghost grisaille, because sometimes I want to sketch in that, because the pencil makes stuff muddy, and so sometimes it's not as useful. I like sketching in paint more than I like sketching in pencil. So I've got that, and the other 3 colors we'll be using apart from that purple are earth colors mostly. They have a little bit of muddiness or opacity to them, and one of them is this olive green, the other one's this sort of light brown tannish color, and there's this cornflower blue, and you can see all of them are a little bit opaque. They are not going to be fully transparent, so this is going to give us a little bit of that gouache look that he has in his original piece. And again, I don't know if that was completed. I can look it up, or you can look it up. I don't remember right now if it was gouache, because he did work sometimes in watercolor gouache for quick sketches, or if it was just a thin oil. And the brushes I'll be using today are a simple quadruple zero round brush here, which is just basically almost a spotter, but it's just a longer brush. It's just a really small brush for the details. I have a Cotman angled brush, and this is only a 1/8 inch angle, and it's a long angle, and I use it also for detailing when I need that, because you can get into edges and stuff. I also have a fine point silver black velvet number 2, and I also have a 1/4 inch golden natural. All of these are synthetic brushes except for the silver black velvet, which is a combination synthetic squirrel. And so we're going to get started with that. And I've been working basically trying to get some of the details of this in, so I am almost done with that, and I'm just going to do the stupid little monkey on his shoulder, and that's the only thing that's left. I didn't do the monkey because I didn't like him, and so I'm going to go ahead and do him last because I just wanted to show you the ghosting part of this. And I do have a ring light for the first time on underneath my camera area, so it's like basically right underneath my camera. It's to try to give me more even lighting than all the other lights that I have on, or an attempt to do that, so hopefully it'll work, and you can sort of see the reflection of it in the thing with its ring light, but it makes the porcelain a little bit too reflective, but hopefully it'll give us more even lighting for the actual piece when we're painting it. Okay, so You can see, like I said, it's just ghosting, and I'm going to keep this purple. It's basically an ink. Let me just tell you that right now, is that it does not lift. It almost is just like goes right into the paper and does not lift up at all. So if you're going to be using this color in your set of Gansai Tambi colors and you're doing a detailed piece, then make sure you know what you're doing, because it's not going to lift up as easily. Or keep a wet angle brush in your hand, so if you want to blend away an edge, you can, like so. So I'm just going to finish ghosting in my sketch with this purple. You can choose to do this, of course, also in sepia or a dark brown or a shadow mix of the other 3 colors. I chose to do the purple this time because instead of mixing a shadow mix of the other colors, because I did like the fact that in the original reference for this master study that there was some purple. There were a lot of purple passages. So as a result of that, I thought it would be useful to do that. Now you're probably wondering what happened to my reference, my projects that we were doing for the Pooh Bear, the realistic one with the pots, and also the Muka study that we were doing Gansai with INKTENSE. Those will be completed in a future stream. It's just that I started getting back into the hang of things after getting back from visiting family and stuff, and I didn't want to get into more complicated projects, and I thought I had a Frazetta study on my plate for a while. I thought it'd be a good idea to go ahead and do that rather than hold him off, because he's really one of my favorite artists from the golden age of illustrators, and he's not quite as early as some of the earlier greats that I liked. He's probably one of the later illustrators, artists that I like. So all the other ones like Rackham, Duloc, Muka, Parrish, Bauer, they all occur earlier in time, more around the turn of the century, so like early 1900s is when they were operating, and some of them did operate into the 30s or the 40s, but that's not really when they were born. They were starting much earlier than that, like, you know, they were publishing pieces all the way at the turn of the century, late 1800s or early 1900s already. In his case, he was operating later than that, so he actually was doing a lot of these comic book pulpy covers and such later on in his life, so more of a, like the later swing of illustrators that showed up later after that. I would say that's probably the last great wave of sort of classic illustrators was with his generation. And not to say there's not very many, not to say there's not other good illustrators working today. There's such a huge number of illustrators working, in fact, that it's hard to get as recognizable as you could back in the day. So maybe one of the reasons he was really appreciated and we really all love him so much is because he was more visible than you could be today, because there just weren't as many people operating in the field. And he really was an unforgettable stylist. You know, some people are colorists and some people are about, you know, composition or perspective. Other people are about style, and definitely, even though you can say he sort of dabbles in all that stuff, it really is just, for him, I think it's his remarkable style and his imagination that makes him one of the best illustrators, and he's got a huge number of people who are imitating his style even today. If you're doing anything that's a sword or sorcery type illustration or fantasy painting, you can bet that you'll have him as one of the influences and one of the great sort of like muses for all these people. I mean, he sort of single-handedly spawned the entire look for Conan and Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and all of these great novels that were being written they were sort of pulpy at the time, and they're still kind of pulpy, but he sort of made them great. He sort of made them greater than what would have just been the actual pulp at the time. So he did some amazing things with the covers that people would actually buy books if he had the illustration, if it was by him. And so he got to a point where he said that he just had illustrations lying around. So the publishers would come up to him and say, do you have any other illustrations or just lying around of anything? Because we will hire a writer to write a story around your illustration as long as it's your illustration, because we know the book's going to sell if it's got your illustration on the cover. So imagine having that kind of fame and have that kind of style. But it's because he did these sort of really heroic, imaginative fantasy pieces, and he worked primarily in oil, though he did say his favorite thing to work in was doing pen and ink drawing work. He did turn pro really at a young age, but he didn't start painting with paint and colors till he was 30. So he turned pro and started drawing pen and ink pieces and other drawings for comic books at the age of 16. Because by the age of 16, he'd actually, believe it or not, already been to art school for 8 years. So one of the things that he got to benefit from that I'm really jealous about is that he actually got to take 8 years of really good art school from a young age, and he was not stifled in his art education. So undoubtedly, I'm sure that's helped how he produced his artwork later on. But he didn't paint till he was 30, so that was, you know, another 15 years almost after he started, you know, turning pro in drawing. So I would say that you can learn how to do any of this stuff at any age, and he shows that you can do it with an education or without an education when it comes to something like painting. Okay, so right now I've pretty much finished off the sketch for this, and he's really sort of famous for his dynamic compositions. There's always a lot of diagonals, so you can see Tarzan is hanging here at a diagonal, and he also uses a lot of triangle compositions as a result of all those diagonals. So you can see a lot of triangles here. There's one triangle right there. There's another triangle shaped right there, and if you look at the gorge part of the bottom of the painting, the spot underneath his arm and leg there makes another triangle. So he was really good at the dynamic diagonal angles that gave a lot of energy to his piece. So we've got that, and now I'm going to start putting in some of the colors. And basically just means now, over this purple sketch, we're going to start to work on it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Frank Frazetta while we are doing this illustration. If you want me to move anything at any point around the screen or something, then let me know. I'll try my best to keep it on screen, but I also have my reference on screen. So not paying exactly all of my attention to... did everybody make it over to this one? Just about. I really don't know how that works anymore. I think I might just not know how to do that right now. I always schedule a stream and then don't know how to make it over to... I start the stream off of my stream page, and apparently it's always a different stream than the one that was scheduled, so don't understand it. Okay, so I'm going to now clean off this purple, or actually I can just add other colors around it. So I'm going to need a little bit of a paper towel. Just going to dip it into my water bucket, and I'm just going to clean this up and wipe all of that off. And I'm just using a tiny little palette on screen, a little ceramic palette dish, and that's because I really don't need to have a bigger one for this. And I also like to keep my palettes all on stream if I can show them at some point during the stream. And as a result of that, that basically means I have to make sure I do a small palette. So I kind of switched to small palettes. Okay, so I'm going to take my yellow, or in this case I'm doing a limited palette, and I have certain stand-ins for the different colors. And so this is not a primary conventional color scheme. So this is more like a tan or a light brown, and we're going to be using that as our yellow and as our orange in this piece. And also for the green, instead of mixing it, I'll be using this really nice olive green. And again, it has these colors, there's different properties of different colors in any pan or tube set. Colors I chose are all very earthy, so they are low intensity, and they're also, all of them except for the purple are semi-opaque or opaque. The purple is the only transparent color here. So this is going to give me a gouache quality right off the bat. And I am applying this in the direction that I would apply it if I was doing a color wheel with complements opposite from each other and in sort of spectral order. So I'm applying yellow at the top, and yellow and green would be a mix, so it comes down here, and then blue. And there is no red, but there is a purple, so I'm going to put the blue here, and then I'll put the purple next to it. Now, the reason I have these colors on here is in case I want any shadow mixes of any of these colors, I want to have them in all the right place. And I did put the purple in the right place originally, but I'm just going to put some more there because it was sort of spreading out last time, so there wasn't that much to get rid of, and I'll put it there. Okay, so let's get started now that we have all of our colors and we've got my sketch. And again, I'm only streaming for 2 hours, so I spent 2 hours before I got on doing this sketch and paint, and yeah, it might have taken me less long if I had sped up a bit in some places, but I sort of interrupted myself a few times, and also I just sort of wanted to relax and take my time, so it took me some time. Okay, so, and it does take more time than tracing. I think it's worth it. I feel like I have a feel for the lines better this way. Okay, so let's start with something that is easy for people to understand as far as color. So I'm going to start a little bit with this field of forest in the back here. And it may not seem like it's the most interesting part, but you can see once you see the colors pop in, that it'll help us understand how we want to color Tarzan and the cliff and everything, because there is a very limited harmonious color scheme for this entire piece. So I'm going to put in some of that green, and if it looks not blue enough to me, I can get some of the purple or some of the violet and make it slightly bluer. And I'm applying it on a wet paper because I do want the forest to sort of blend out already, so I don't want it to have hard edges, because I did that in the underwash for the purple, and you can see why it doesn't really matter that I did that for the sketch, because once you have these darker colors, they sort of cover it right up. So you also have to be careful not to make it too dark if you want to make sure it's receding, so you can go ahead and lift it out a bit if you want to make sure it's the part of the further part of the background. Now there is more of a blue-green look to some of these greens, and he was probably using not the same colors as me. We're just trying to do some similar coloring as him, so don't worry about getting the exact same colors. As long as you match the temperature and a limited color scheme, you can get a pretty decently close look. And if I'm really unhappy with this green, I can switch to something else. Alright, so I think probably now that I've gone and wetted all that out, I don't necessarily know that I do want to work on that part of the forest immediately. And that's the other nice thing about doing a painting of your own, is that you don't have to do what you say you're going to do. You can change your mind. You don't have to automatically do that. I don't know if I think that green might just be too dark in value for what I wanted to do. So I think I might just do the warmer parts first, further up. And I will choose to do them wet on dry. There's a little bit of water still seeping down, and I can just blend the edges of this out with the other brush. And if it's wet on wet higher up, it's just going to blend out more like it is here, and that's fine too. Now we don't have to do a forgery of it. I always say that when we're doing a master study. The point is try to walk in the artist's shoes, or try to walk in his brush strokes. And is that something that you find instructive and you learn something from, then you're doing the right thing. If you feel like you're still doing more of your own strokes and not learning as much, then you have to try to emulate, at least for a study, more of the artist's strokes of what you're doing. So, and I will try to do the figure and the monkey probably, because, and the cliff, they're just more interesting than this. This looks like it's going to take some time to build up anyway. Do we have any questions yet? And that's the other thing about opaque colors, is usually they give you rather muddy mixes, so one of the things to watch out for is trying to mix opaque colors, is that they might end up looking pretty muddy, more muddy than you expected them to. So I might switch to a different green, like I said. Okay, so in the meantime, try to do something that works in one stroke so that you guys don't feel like this is all going to be lifting and removing, is that this temple back here has a bluish green look to it, so we can go ahead and put down some blue and also a very light rendition of that green. Just wet into wet and color in the whole thing, and it'll help us see that as a mass in the background. Just bring that down. If you can see in my City of Brass video on YouTube where I did gouache over grisaille, this is watercolor over a ghost grisaille, but you can see that it is helpful to have done some stuff underneath, because then you can come back in and glazes. Glazes are really helpful to just come back and change the color temperature of something if you've already have the line outlines of something down. And that's not to say that I can't add more value. I will, because all of this paint is making this lighter. It's making my grisaille lighter, so I have to come back and darken up. So the point of the grisaille isn't that you never have to do any values after that. It's just that it does take care of a lot of them for you. And I had some questions off of the stream asking me about the grisaille and how dark you need to make it and everything like that. So I'm going to try to answer those. I'm going to actually open that up real quick so that I can answer those questions, because they were something that I was asked. I think it was Moon's questions. And so let me go ahead and just pop that up someplace where it's not blocking my reference. And okay, so she asked how dark is the darkest dark for a value 5 and for a 5 and 3 value painting. Okay, so the answer to that is it really depends on how you are doing your final colors. So if your final colors are just meant to be a glaze on top of something, like if I'm just doing a glaze like I am here, then the value underneath can be very close to the final value. However, in this case, I did plan on coming back in and making stuff darker. So it does not have to be the final value. So I'm probably going to come back in and make some of these colors darker. So that's not the final value. That purple is just a ghost shadow sketch of what I was doing. Now, if I wanted to make sure that if I have 5 values or 3 values, that my darkest value, it should go through your whole value range. So if you have 3 values in a piece, or 5 values in a piece, or 7 values in a piece, unless you're doing a high key painting where your piece only has a certain set amount of values, you should go through your entire set of values, so from darkest to lightest. There are certain paintings that don't go through the entire value range, and that's what they're called. They're called high key pieces or low key pieces if they only have a low value range. So it's not necessary that every piece you do goes through lightest to darkest, but the higher contrast you have, the more sort of believable a subject will look. So if you're aiming for realism, then go for more values. If you're aiming for mood, then you can vary that depending on what you're going for. So it all depends on what you end up doing near the end. So it's not such an easy question to answer. It has to be geared more towards specific pieces. So a piece like this does have really dark darks, and so you are going to have to make sure that you have light lights and dark darks, and you're going to go through most of the full value range here. But when it comes to certain other pieces, you might be working on something like, cotton candy, or just, a zoom in of something like some peppermints or something like that, and you might never get past a mid-value range if you're doing something that's sort of like a sunny, cheery, sort of candy-like color scheme. So it all depends on what you're working on. So if your final piece has a full value range, your grisaille will have a full value range. If your final piece does not have a full value range, your grisaille will not have a full value range, and that's the answer in short. But and if you wanted to look at it in a more lengthy way, it all depends on how much you want to cover up the grisaille, because if you want to cover it up more or less, that also will change your value range. So you might decide that you're going to cover it up a little bit, and in which case it should be your full value range. If you're going to cover it up a lot, then you can actually, make it lighter or darker as you choose and then play along with it. There's no hard set rules for this. Lots of different people, lots of old masters and everybody, they used all of these things in different ways. So this is not, it's not just based off of it's not mathematical. This is still art, and you're still going to do this in such a way as to be dependent on the actual subject and the mood and your own style. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're doing something. Is that there's not a formula. There's not going to be a formula. Okay, and I can see there that already the sketch lines there are fading, and they'll have to come back and make them darker after I add in more of the cliff colors down here. So, the other question was, how many colors can you layer over, can you glaze over a grisaille? That depends on your paint, and it depends on your subject's needs. If your subject requires you to glaze many times, then you can glaze like up to 20 layers on a watercolor, piece. People do that for botanicals and such. Now, if you have a piece that, if you have paper that's not going to put up with that, or a subject where that is not required, or if you feel like your style will make it too scratchy, or your subject needs to be looser, then you're going to have fewer layers. So again, it depends on your style, it depends on the paper, it depends on your paint, because of course you can't do that many layers with gouache. You can do that with ink or watercolor, but you can't do it with gouache. So all of that stuff is relative. It's not a single answer, but it does depend on your final subject. And the glazed layer can change the value quite a bit. So you can go and completely obliterate a dark by adding in an opaque-ish color over it if you're working in gouache. But if you're interested in not changing the value, it'll just make it darker. You can just add a color over it and it'll just get darker. But if you add white over it, it'll make it lighter. So you can, it's all about adjusting. It's all about adjusting until you are happy looking at your reference or from your imagination with whatever the results are. it's not really about having a mathematical formula to make it work. And it seems like it's a hard thing to say that. There are obviously certain things that I can tell you that are fixed, like trying to work for a fixed value range, you know, compositional rules and such that are more geared towards successful, appealing looking final paintings and stuff. But there's a lot of other stuff that is just really going to depend on your subject and your style and your tools. Okay. Okay, so now that I've just done basically really ghost washes in for the cliff there too. Once that dries, we can come back in and do it in smaller areas. Over there, I will go ahead and work more wet on dry from now on away from the cliff. And you can see that I'm mostly eating away most of my purple. So the purple for me in this case wasn't really a grisaille, it was more just a sketch. If I really wanted it to be a true grisaille, it would have to have gone up in value enough that you have all the darks and all the lights and everything. In this case, it just basically is serving very much as just a sort of sketch stand-in. And if you want to see me do other videos where I do the grisaille or the painting from beginning to end, I have a few videos where I do that, where I have a watercolor versus gouache, and both of them use grisaille. So, and I will keep doing it. It's fine for you to see it numerous times because it's the kind of thing where you have to see it numerous times before it sort of looks, you know, looks understandable, feels understandable. He's got a lot of these sort of smoky, opaque-ish, sort of foggy looking colors in this with the blue and the green, which is why I chose the earthy colors. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to be super happy with those choices. Boy, they look really reflective on there until they dry. Maybe I should angle it a little bit. I'll change once it dries. Is it looking okay on screen? Okay, well I'll do his skin then. I'll move on to the skin. That's very orange, so you want to dull that down with the opposite of yellow, which is the blue. So I'm going to add a little bit of the cornflower blue to that and then bring it back. Give him a bit of a more tan skin tone. Don't want it to get too blue either, but I think this is going to end up being another one of those pieces that we don't finish in 2 hours, even though I already spent 2 hours on it.
I have a question: when working with watercolors, does glazing tend to make it look opaque, or do they maintain their transparent quality?
If you're using transparent colors and you glaze with them, then everything will still look opaque. If you use opaque colors when you glaze, then you will work up yourself, your paint, into a opaque finish by the end of it, because it will start to build up on the paper into opaque colors. But if you are working only with transparents, then you'll have sort of a transparent look. So let me see if I can. I don't know how to do that right now. But yeah, if you use too many transparent colors, then you know the colors will end up in the end looking darker. So you might end up with a dark brown if you layer forever. I mean, if you layer all sorts of different colors. But if you layer transparent colors and you're going for, like, I don't know, a cool end result or a warm end result, you will end up with all of the colors still being transparent glazes. But if you use even one opaque color in that mix, then your end result will be opaque. And you can sort of thin down semi-opaque colors so that they look like they are transparent, but they'll still give more of a cloudy look. I mean, what I'm using today is semi-opaque colors, so if I ever go too thick with any of them, then they will start to look a little bit muddy. But I'm not really that concerned with the quality of the opacity, because I know I'm only going to be doing sort of thinner glazes, and also I can also take the purple and bring it back out. So that's the danger I have, is am I going to end up covering this purple up? Okay. We usually end up doing some nice smooth-skinned girls usually, so this is a complete change to that, and that this guy is covered with muscles. And it's funny, Frazetta did a huge number of muscle-bound guys, and he used himself as a reference quite often, so he would work out a lot, and he kind of looked like Clint Eastwood. He was friends with Clint Eastwood too, so he looked like Clint Eastwood and he was friends with Clint Eastwood. But he was actually also really a homebody. He was like super sort of like anti wanting to get out and travel as much. Not that he didn't go out and have a lot of fun, but he spent most of his time at his place. And famous people, when they wanted to come and see him, usually came and saw him at his place. So when Sylvester Stallone wanted to see him, he flew out of California to where he lived to go and see Frazetta. Same thing for Clint Eastwood and George Lucas. They went to go visit him. And all of these people were in different ways, and there's lots of people who were inspired by Frazetta. So the Schwarzenegger Conan movie by John Milius was heavily inspired by all of the work done by Frank Frazetta. And George Lucas was also inspired by him. I think the Slave Leia costume, which looks very Frazetta-ish, was inspired by Frazetta and Frazetta's work. So,
you have a question. Why did you sketch in purple? Sorry if you already covered this.
I sketched in purple because it makes a good shadow color. So I could notice in the original piece that a lot of the shadows look like they were purple. So it just lets me put in my shadow base layer in that color without having to worry about having, a clash in color. So I could have used brown, and I could have used black. I mean, it's not like I couldn't have used other colors, but I felt like purple was a good choice for me, because I could see that it was a shadow purple off of the cliff, and there was also shadows there was also shadows on him that look purple. So as a result of that, I really sort of wanted to echo that and bring that in. So he has also got a lot of low intensity skin tones and colors, and if you were working in gouache, you would sort of meld all of these together. So I'm sort of doing like a watercolor tiling almost instead of a glazing. So you can see the purple underneath it, and it's gonna, in the end, it should help me with my values. And I can always, even when I cover it up, I can still see some of it more than I would be able to see a pencil, and I can continue to darken it up. So okay, and you want me to just, you said you wanted me to swing this out of the way so it's not as reflective?
You might want to give that a try, by the way. It doesn't reflect right back at the camera.
Okay, so let me move this light and angle it, or put it in such a direction so that it's not directly in front of my camera, because I'm getting input from Elijah that it is making my paint too reflective. So hold on the page. Okay. Maybe you can help angle it over there. Okay, is that good? Okay. Alright, yeah, because I don't want the paint to be super reflective. If it is, that's not really helpful. Trade bad light for light that's blinding in the paint. That'll make people want to paint more. Okay, so now you can maybe see a little bit better what's going on with his back there. And I think I might, like I said, it's perfectly fine to choose another green if that one looks too muddy. I'm still going to keep working with the same colors for now, but if anything becomes problematic, then I can definitely switch. I'll get more of the tannish yellow, and I'm going to mix some of my blue into it to make a shadow skin tone. So and this blue is very low intensity, so as a result of that, the shadow skin tone goes to green almost immediately. So he does have a lot of green in there, which is why I did that, but we also have to be careful that it doesn't just become gray when we're applying it to him, too gray. Okay, and I don't know how many people here are interested in seeing muscle-bound backs develop, so I'll definitely move on to different parts of him once we do that, but there is a difference between men and women. If you are doing men that are super muscular, is that, yeah, it will take you time to render all of the muscles in comparison to just being able to move on quicker with smooth skin. That's really, I mean, it's kind of like when you're doing an elderly person too, where you have a lot more wrinkles and stuff to render, and it's interesting to me. To me, I found all of that interesting, so you might find it tedious. If you do, then do skinny people. Don't do people that have a huge amount of musculature. And the other thing to do is definitely try to pay attention to maybe glazing. If you can glaze the whole thing in first in one color, so I can come in and do the whole arm, and maybe that makes it easier for some people too. Instead of doing it sectionally in tiles like I was doing the back, you can do the whole thing in one color and then come back after that's dry and develop the shadows over there. So let's go ahead and do that with this greenish tone, because it is darker than the purple. I mean, it is not hiding the purple completely, but it is also going to probably make it so you can see how I do the darks more clearly. So that is the other way to do that if you don't want to work in mini tiles like I was working right there. Just do all one layer first and then come back and do that. It would be even easier if you wanted to do the grisaille completely in the value, and then you could come back and glaze with this. But I think if you have a sketch in, so just don't let that confuse you. This isn't quite a grisaille. This is just a purple sketch, a shadow color sketch, but it's actually not a shadow undervalue painting. It's just it's mostly just a sketch in purple. Okay, so that is coming in very dark and brown, so I'm going to go ahead and do his legs there in brown. And once we do all the local color glazes, then it'll be easier for us to figure out the shadows, or at least for you guys, instead of working sectionally in little tiles. So I'll do that, and I'll probably make it go a little bit faster on screen too as a result. So I've got that. Got a lovely cheetah pattern loincloth in the original one, and you can see that there's no red, no pure reds, no pure yellows in the original piece, and no super clean greens except for in the sort of trees in the distance, and also no super high saturation intensity blues. And sort of the purple he always has. It's something that he always uses, is a purple and yellow and orange. It gives that high fantasy sci-fi feel to stuff, so that's one of his sort of signature colors that he always has. But you can see how much clearer that figure looks just because I went and stopped blocking in everything in a slower way. So once that dries, we can come back in shadows. In the meantime, we can just work on the hair, and with the hair I have a mix of the green and the purple and the blue to make a dark color, and I'm just going to come in here, and it's going to give me mostly a black. It's going to look mostly like a black is what I'm working on. And your brush is made out of hair, so it's actually very good at painting natural hair because it ends in wispy strokes. So it's going to be easier to draw hair with a brush than it is if you were drawing with a pencil or if you were drawing with a stick. So hair can be really easy as long as you let your brush do the wispy strokes for you, and you don't bring down the paint so that it's so wet that you lose the wisps at the end of the hair. And that's something that I figured out because some years ago when I went to go do some hair in with pencil, after many years of just having done it with a brush, it suddenly became so much harder. And I was like, well, why is this not working? I usually do hair so well with a brush, and I realized it's the pencil is pointed and fine, whereas the brush has that fine tip, and so it was really helping me do my hair versus or do the hair of the person on the page. Doing my hair makes it look like I'm doing my hair in real life. But yeah, it helped me render the hair without having as nearly as much trouble as you would if you were doing it with a pencil. Not to say it's not possible. You can certainly do it with a pencil, you can do it with a stick, you can do it with whatever you want, but certain tools will make certain things easier. And a brush, I found, does make hair easier. You want to make the center part to lose a little bit of the line and the wispiness, and that's how you're going to have that shadowed graded edge. You can also do that with marker blending. When you blend get a clear alcohol marker and blend an edge out, you can do it that way too if you're not a person who works with paints and brushes, but you work with markers, and that's the other way to do it. But the key is to work towards the highlight in a sort of ziggy, zaggy sort of fashion way, and towards the highlight instead of a straight line. And then the ends of it wisp out and fade. And you would do the exact same thing if you were working in gouache, so, or in oil or in anything else. So it's just going to be that end. It's up to you how much definition or tendrils you want to add, but it's funny how that you don't actually have to add in that many to make it look good. So keep that in mind too. Okay. Just giving him a nice highlight at the back of his head. And let's get over to the... Now, I am covering up the purple for here, so you might again ask, well, what was the use of it? Well, it was my sketch. So I didn't do much of a pencil sketch here. I just did the sketch of the entire piece with paint. And now I don't have any real pencil lines to erase, and also the places where it's going to show up, it'll give me a little bit of shadow color where it does show up. It'll make my colors darker in the shadow areas without me having to work as hard as I would have if I hadn't done any of that sketch. So, you know, it's all serving that sort of purpose, is that it's helping me with my shadows. But, you know, when that question comes up again is how much can a glazed layer or an overlayer change the value? Look at how much I'm changing the value here. It's because I'm doing this in something that's much more of a black, you know, it's a shadow mix of all these colors. So it's actually changing my underlayer color quite a bit, so that's totally up to you. And that area is wet, the paper is wet, so it's not holding a sharp shadow like I want it to, so I'm just going to come back to that later and make that sharper later, just that edge here, because that edge won't hold it. But I can go ahead and do the rest of it, and just have a wispy stroke. And you don't have to hit your underlines completely. Even if you don't, it's okay. You can always pick away at it so that it looks like more like where you want it to be. Okay, so that's his head for the most part. I'm going to come back to this area once it's dry and add in the shadow colors for just the edge of his head there. Looks like it's drying out as we speak under this light, so I think that might work. But yeah, this isn't a black that I'm using. This is just a mix of all of the colors, and it's giving me a nice grayish, purpley, black type color. So. Okay, just gonna move my ref up a little bit. So looks like his body is dry, but I'm gonna actually work on his loincloth and stuff first before we get back to that. Also going to come back in and give him sort of a warmer leg area here before we move on to the shadows. Shadows in the heat and nice sun are quite warm, so never make your shadows super cold and just move on unless you're in really artificial light. It doesn't look natural for sunlight. Okay. And like I said, I'll come back and work on the back and such later, and we can get on to the loincloth, which I think is going to be more interesting. I'm going to switch to my small little round here to do the cheetah spots, but let's throw in the orange first. So let's get a nice actual orange in there. Using the unmuddied tan color, and just with a teeny bit of that. And I can start wet on dry. Looks like he's got, if you look at the reference, Looks like he's got the fraying ends of the skin at the edges. So what we want to do for those edges is just come around and soften out the paint before it dries so we can have that soft look. Now, people always ask me, or they've asked me often, how when I do this there's no bleeds and blooms, but when they try it they end up having some bleeds and blooms. It's too much water in your brush. Try to make sure your blending brush has almost no water in it. It has to be just basically dry almost, and then you brush away the edges and make them soft. If it has any real amount of water in it, and apart from it just being clean, then you're going to end up with a big old bleed everywhere and a bloom. So just keep that in mind. It's basically, if it's not, if you have more water, you lose control, and that's great for background effects, but you don't want that for the foreground. And it's funny, he's not facing us, he's facing away, and you would think that makes the piece easier, and in some ways it does because he doesn't have a face, but it also makes it in some ways more difficult because if you don't render him right, then you won't read as a person because you have no face to help you, you've got no features to help you, so you've got to make sure his stance and posture are correct, otherwise he doesn't look like a person. And there's a lot of stuff to fix here with the muscle in his back and the shading there, because the sort of half-developed, quarter-developed shading there is giving him shadows in his back where they're not supposed to be. So we're going to, of course, figure that out later. But right now we're working on another part of it. So just to let you know, it's always going to be an ugly stage. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do my cheetah spots on this in the purple mixed with the green, because again that gives me a nice blackish color just like it did for the hair. So I'm just going to mix the purple in with the smoky olive green, and I'm going to use that for the spots. Now you don't have to, just like for a real cheetah, you don't have to go and do every little spot, but just try to give these little sort of, looks almost like the kind of stain you'd get from lipstick if you dabbed it on a napkin. And that's a very, I guess, obscure reference if you don't wear lipstick, but it's like an open O, and you want to just make that mark, but make it with scraggly edges. And I'm using my quadruple zero round for that because this is a tiny piece. Now, this is one of those pieces where as soon as I drew it this size, I wished I had drawn it bigger because it actually has so much beautiful color and detail in it that if you did it larger, you could have a lot more fun with it. But, you know, it's the kind of thing where you have to ask yourself, do I want to get more of it done on stream? Because if I made any of these pieces larger, they wouldn't get done on stream even to the amount that they do. So I'm trying to work this down to a fine art. Who knows how long it's going to take to try to figure it out so I can make sure I can finish the pieces on stream. Okay, some more of those. And I'm not trying to make them all equally round or exactly what I see there. I'm just trying to follow the angle of the pieces because I don't want them to be completely flat. If they end up being completely flat, then it'll look like he's not really wearing the skin. It'll look like I cut out a sticker of cheetah skin or something, or leopard skin, and sort of fitted it into the space where he is. And we're not doing that. This is a painting of him wearing the skin. It's not a stamped image of leopard skin over his silhouette area. So I'm trying to get the angle of the spots first before I go back and get the rest of them. They don't even all have to look like half ovals in the end or even now, but I'm actually first going to get the angles. I'm only getting the halves of them first because I want to get the angles the spots right, because if I get obsessed with making them round, I'm afraid that I'm going to sort of forget the angle they're lying on. Sort of leaning this way, so I'm trying to make the lines at least of half of the spot pattern lean that way before I come back and finish it. And you can do it more sort of slowly and deliberately when you're not doing something like a stream, but that's what I've told you guys before, is that when I'm on a stream, I actually try to pay more attention how I could do something faster versus what I would do in real life. So I actually employ more of these sort of how do I make this faster here than I would if I was just working on this in real life, because and on my own time in real life versus in real life on a stream. I don't know if you guys ever read the Edgar Rice Burroughs old classic, the original unabridged Tarzan. I did. I read, I think, a few of them before I gave up, because there was like, I don't know, like 20 of them, maybe more, because he was making money writing them. Edgar Rice Burroughs is the same one who wrote John Carter of Mars as well. So he was a series sci-fi and fantasy writer, so he was not writing to stop at one book or a few books, so he was getting paid to do as many as possible. So I think I was in the third book where Jane dies, and I was like, they're killing people that are like main characters. I'm going to stop reading this, because I wasn't really interested in Tarzan seeing new and different people if Jane was dead too, because I was a sentimental young person. So I was like, Jane died, okay, I'll stop reading. Of course, anybody who was buying anything with a Frazetta cover on it wasn't buying it for the book, they were just buying it for the cover anyway. I wasn't of that generation, so this was just at my school library as a book, and I don't even think it had the Frazetta cover. I think it had somebody else's cover on it, so I just read it because, well, I knew who Tarzan was. I watched Tarzan movies growing up. My parents had some black and white and color Tarzan movies, so my dad always liked all those classic movies of, you know, all those Robinson Crusoe or Swiss Family Robinson or Tarzan. Anybody who's stuck in the wilderness someplace, my dad would have that movie. I don't know why. I think it was almost like I felt like my dad was trying to prepare us for being stuck in the wilderness somehow. So I was like, okay, is this like a training test or something, that we were all like watching it really closely? So, and then I ended up reading like in a psychology paper, you know, as an adult, that if Tarzan had really existed, he would not have been able to you know, and you're like, duh, this is obviously true, but I actually thought it would be possible. Like, he was smart enough to have figured out how to read French, speak English, you know, reassimilate, turn into Lord Greystoke and everything, and despite also being Tarzan of the jungle. No, apparently it's not true. Anybody who actually was a feral child in real life, all the real studies have shown that if you were a feral child in real life, you are not going to come back and assimilate or be able to learn your language or do anything normal. You're just totally ruined. So I'm glad Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote it that way, though, because it did make us have a great hero in the story. And apparently at some point, I remember reading this too, that Tarzan was like, I think the highest number of movies made after a fictional character, the largest number of movies was Tarzan movies. There's no other fictional character has had more movies made after him than Tarzan, apparently. And I guess it's because in the olden days they made a ton of Tarzan movies. Go figure. Okay, so now I'm going to use a little bit of the purple mixed into less of the gray to make more of a purple shadow, but not quite as dark of a shadow, to come and do the shading onto the edges of the leopard skin. And this is all, like I said, it's fine work. The only difference if you were doing this larger, for all intents and purposes, is that you would use larger brushes. That's the only difference between large and small paintings, and that you use probably less water because you don't have to spread your paint as far. As far as I'm concerned, there's no other real difference between when I have done larger or smaller pieces, is less water and larger brushes. Less water and smaller brushes for smaller pieces, and, you know, more water and larger brushes if you're going in the direction of big paintings.
I have a question. How long would a piece like this be in your own time?
In my own time, I would probably spend, I would sketch it one day and spend just a few hours like I did today sketching it. And then instead of painting it in a rush like this, sometimes I almost feel like when I stream, I've told you guys this many times before, is that your best work is not going to happen when you're teaching, because you'll be distracted teaching and answering questions. and you're also going to be distracted because it's streamed, so it's timed. So I would actually take this more leisurely and really study the shadows and his shapes and his type of brush strokes. And as much as I try to teach you guys, I always try to also tell you guys that if I was doing this on my own, it would be better than this because I'd give more attention to it, my undivided attention to it. So it might take me the same amount of time, a few more hours. I'd probably spend like 3 or 4 hours painting this in real life versus 2 hours. I don't know, if I don't get it done, I'll spend another hour or two finishing it up. But it would be more efficiently spent, so I'd get more done in that time than when I do on stream. Because on stream, I constantly have in the back of my mind that you guys are watching and that I might screw something up or say something dumb or, you know, whatever it is. And so that's a pressure I have. And also, I'm pressured to move fast and not take my time. Whereas in real life, you know, nobody's going to tell you, why are you looking at this? Why have you paused to think about this? You can pause and think about stuff. You can give yourself fresh eyes and come back. I mean, that's happened to me for stream pieces too, where even if I'm done on the stream, later I'll come back in and I'll fix something because I see it with fresh eyes. Now, that's something that Frazetta did, by the way, too. He had a big mirror hanging up in his room that he used to look at his pieces in opposite, you know, in the reflection. And he also had a shrinking tool where he would, you know, use something to see his paintings all shrunk down so that they would look like they would look on the cover of a novel, because a lot of these were going to be published on paperback novels. And so he'd, you know, just use like a basically an opposite lens sort of magnifying glass, I think, whatever the equivalent of what they used to have back then, because he didn't have a digital camera or anything like that. But he'd shrink it down, and then he would be able to look at it in a much smaller size and gauge its values and its suitability and clarity for a paperback size novel. So that's the kind of thing that, you know, you get to do on your own time. You don't get to do that if you're, you know, if you're doing a live stream. So, I mean, like I said, I try to do fiddly stuff, and even when I am doing fiddly stuff, I think to myself as I'm doing it, are you guys getting bored because I'm starting to do the details in one area, and then I sort of try to move on, you know? So there's a limited amount. So I'd probably, instead of 2 hours, I'd do 4 hours or 3 hours, and I'd also spend it more efficiently and sort of take breaks if I had to and really think about what I wanted to do. And I also see that this knife blade is sort of blending into his back a bit. I'm probably going to come back with some white to bring the hilt of that out and straighten the knife out anyway. So that's definitely something you can do. Don't be afraid to correct something if it looks wonky. You know, leaving white out of your painting, because that's a rule for watercolor, is not going to help you if you've got something in there that doesn't look good. So if you're doing something, I used to do that all the time off stream again, which is I never used to use white to correct stuff. And ever since I started streaming, I do use white if I feel like I need to correct something. Or I go back and lift it out with a lifting brush, you know, a scrubber brush, and lift it out. So if you want to correct a compositional element that doesn't look right, that is wonky and needs to be fixed, then do it. Don't just leave it there. And again, you just do that in your free time. So. I mean, I'm glad I did the sketch before I started, because if I was working on the sketch now too, then this would be going slower. But you can see from the actual piece that the values in the original piece are darker, which means that it's going to take us, it takes you as much time to finish a piece as it takes you to get to, if you're doing a master study, up to the values that you see there, or if you're doing an original, up to the values that you see in your own photo or in your imagination for whatever the mood of the piece is. So you just have to build up to that. And in watercolor, it's you might feel like it's slow, but it's actually still a heck of a lot faster than it is for oil, where you have to wait days, you know, for oil paint to dry. And even if you're using a speeding up medium to make it dry faster, it still takes much longer to dry than acrylic, which takes longer to dry than watercolor. So watercolor is still the fastest medium, and also the least cumbersome. You don't have as many tools or cleanup with watercolor as you do with a lot of these other mediums. Okay, so I'm going to come down to his legs now, and I'm really looking for a dark shadow color on his legs to build up the shadow so we can have that. His legs are some of the darkest in the original piece. And your color reference might be different from mine. My computer screen is different from my reference than it might be for yours, or you might be looking at a different version of the original than I'm using. Because I remember somebody asked me that at some point for another piece, why I was doing more of a certain color or less of a certain color in one of my master's studies, and I said, well, it's not guaranteed that you're using the same reference as me. So you might just be using a different reference, in which case we're not going to have the same end result, right? So try to keep that in mind when you're looking at the reference and then watching me do this also, is that compensate for perhaps different computer screens and also different sources of reference. Okay. And just like with the pencil sketch, sometimes you really do feel like the original under sketch is better, and you just have to work at it until you get it back up to that level of being happy with the sketch later on. And he's got sort of a bulging muscle here, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't get completely flattened out, and then another curve for this back of the knee area, and then another small curve for the foreshortened area right below his kneecap, and another curve here, which is going to be in the green colors. So I'm going to try to leave some of that blank, but I just wanted to get those curves there right. And I'll even give it an outline. I'll come back with a more opaque green if I have to. Just want to preserve the correct outline shapes there.
Will there be a sky color?
In his original piece, there is no sky color. All of this is painted in, and the sky in my reference is white. Typically, when he did pieces like this, I've noticed that either the sky is completely dark and it's a night scene or a sunset scene or something, or it's completely white and there's no color there or almost no color. So I guess in this case, decided on no color. Now I'm just going to go and put in the shadows around his knee area by leaving out some of the parts where he didn't make it darker. And again, this can be adjusted. This can be adjusted as much as you want. Even after the stream, I can come back and say, well, I don't feel like that looks right, which I often do for certain things, especially for just fixing sometimes the smallest fixes. It may not seem like much to you. It's not like I'm hiding that much. It's literally just looking at it with fresh eyes might keep it looking a little bit more accurate from a particular angle or something, and then that's what you want to fix. But it's just those small touches like that that finish off a piece, which is that makes it look more accurate and divides up something from being more of a beginner's work to more of an advanced person's work. It's literally just the polishing of hard and soft edges and fixing of certain compositional elements for accuracy, because everybody else, even with less practice, can get the rest of the way there. It's just that last part of it with the correct edges and certain, inaccuracies of composition that you can, try not to have too many of those if you're working in paint, because it's kind of hard to fix compositional problems that are too large. But sometimes when you're painting, something might get skewed over or get flatter. If it's an ellipse, if it's circular, you might flatten it out. If it's, an eye or a nose, you might move it in slightly the wrong direction or something. And so that's the kind of thing that you can go back and fix in. But if it's a bigger problem than that, like perspective or something, that's the kind of thing you want to do starting out in the piece. You want to make sure that you have a good idea of how to do that. And if you're doing a piece from scratch or from a photo, all your photographs have accurate perspective. So if you use a ruler when you are doing a piece that's a landscape, even if it's a real life piece, you should be able to get it in accurate perspective, because all photos have accurate perspective. So if you're not a perspective whiz, then just ruler down, measure the angles in your piece if you're not tracing, and use a ruler. And if you're tracing, you'll still have to do that, because if it's actually architecture, you'll still have to come back in and use a ruler. Another reason why I'm not the biggest fan of tracing is when it comes to stuff like that is you will have to do hand sketching a lot. Even if you do like some guiding lines, you're going to have to come back and do a lot of it by hand. So just have some fun with it. Try to train yourself to do that and have fun with it. Okay, so now his legs are dark. I'm going to come back and do the shadow color and his loincloth in this area again. And it looks like it's like the loincloth is coming all the way up to actually like right here. and we just don't see it because it's blended out. For the sake of clarity, I went ahead and patched it in there because I don't think it's that obvious to anybody where it's ending or stopping. So I think we can sort of like figure out where we want it to be. If we want it to be lower, like say I do want it to be lower, let's just turn that back into landscape, and let's make it so that we patch it in so it's lower here, so that we know that it's connected there, because I think it might be one of those, it's great artistically, but it might be confusing in a live stream where that's ending. So go and throw that in as an actual border. But he had that as a diminished edge or as a disappearing edge because it's attractive as a turning form for that edge to not be there, you know, so that's why he does that. So that's why we're blending that out. Okay, and make some of this darker again. So you can see that instead of moving on to the next part of it, I'm coming here and now fiddling with these edges, and that's just a compromise that you're going to make, which is that do you want to move on to the next part of it, or do you want to fiddle with the part of it that you're working on? Because if it does not match up to what you see in the study and it's you want to get more out of it, then you can do it more. If you just want to do a loose study, you can do that too. You don't have to do a super in-depth study that gets everything. But I just want to do a few of the things that I'm doing here because I find them interesting, and once I stop finding them interesting, I'll move on. Okay, I see some more lines here. I'm going to go ahead and put them in the shadow here. He loved doing shadow strokes that had parallel hatching lines in them. He did that a lot in ink, and he also did it when he painted. Very, very cool. Okay, so now I'm going to take the purple, and just like the actual pure purple, and I'm going to go ahead and mix that, just wet it up a bit and have it on the palette. And then I'm going to use it to shadow in. So you can see how this part of it versus the rest of the piece needs to be made darker. So I might even go back in and make some of the hair darker there because the hair should be the same value as the shadow under the legs or darker. So again, you can use one value area to measure up other value areas and see if you need to make something darker, lighter, warmer, cooler. As long as you've got one really dark spot in, it'll help you measure the darkness of the other ones. And I've said that before. And if you don't want to have every edge of that skin, then you can sit there and blend some of them out. I'm going to try to make sure I only throw in selective ones, and if I throw in one too many, then I can just blend them out. Just trying to give the darker edges of this loincloth before I move on. I feel like if we've got a nice developed grounded figure hanging off the cliff, then we should be able to work on the rest of it pretty easily. And one of the reasons I chose this one instead of one where he's got a figure facing forward is I don't think I've done very many pieces for you guys with a male figure in it, and I wanted to sort of warm up with the figure for you guys with the head not facing this way and only like some of the muscles in the receding figure. So I thought this was a perfect example of what we could do to warm up with that as a master study. And that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of master studies on this channel too versus the pre-recorded videos where I try to do more originals sometimes. And it's because the master studies are perfect for the streams because we can learn about somebody else's art style who's famous and lived in the past, and originals just take much longer because with this somebody else has made these choices and I'm studying them but I'm copying them. Whereas if I was doing an original piece, I have to make all of my own choices and it would take even longer. So if I'm doing it in this style, if I was doing like a really easy painting, I can slap out a whole bunch of originals, and like I did with those little wedding bears or whatever, those are really easy. You can do an original piece like that on stream. But if you want to do a complicated piece like this on stream, it'll take many more hours if you were doing not a master study but an original. You'll have to do your thumbnails. You'll have to do your different sketches and revised thumbnails. You're going to have to maybe get photo reference for the musculature and pose, and then you're going to have to decide on your color wheel and color scheme and do your sketch, and then after you do your sketch it'll take you a few days to work on the painting. It depends on how fast of a painter you are, but some people take weeks to do pieces like this and some people take a few days or any place in between. There's lots of different things. Frazetta himself was a super fast painter, he could turn out an oil painting piece in 1 or 2 days, which is totally unheard of as far as oil painting. But he would, if you looked at his pieces, one of the reasons he did that, first of all, he was like a manic, crazy dude who totally worked really fast and like all through the night. You know, he'd start in the evening and then work all through the night and then do that for like 2 days of, you know, working on it for 2 nights and get it done. And some of his most famous pieces were done in that quick fashion. But he did that because he was operating off of a lot of sort of bursts of energy, and he left a lot of the parts of some of his pieces are really loose. They're loosely rendered. The oil doesn't have hard edges. A lot of the background characters and whatever don't have a lot of details, and it's very loose. In fact, it makes it better because it's very emotional that way instead of it being over-rendered. So it was a really good choice, actually, for him to do that. But it is because he didn't choose to sit there and over-render everything. If he was going to do, you know, some kind of super rendered to death piece with a lot of detail in the front and background and everything, and everybody's costumes and everything, then it wasn't going to be possible. So it did match his style, and it did match his subjects. You know, it's easier to draw somebody fast if they're not wearing like Russian princess attire and huge amount of headgear. If they're wearing a loincloth or nothing at all, then it's easier to get them done, you know? So a part of it isn't magic. A part of it is if you look at it, you can see why he did that. And the other part of it is, yes, the dude was talented. And again, he had 8 years of art school training behind him in his young age, which helped him really sort of open up and get good at his art without it being something that was ever stifled. And the other part of it is that he chose to do a style and subjects that he could complete fast. You know, if he couldn't complete them fast, then it wouldn't have been. You know, it would have to be, if he was doing, like I said, people with wearing crown jewels and, like, embroidered fabrics and all that other stuff, then he would have to be doing others, you know, he'd have to be taking much longer. So I've come back with a little bit of the green and the cornflower blue, but the blue is already opaque. It's got a little bit of a opacity to it on top of its brown, and the green does too. I've added a little bit of the blue to it to make it a little bit more opaque. You can also sort of smuggle white into a painting that way by using opaque colors to mix into a transparent color, and it'll give it a little bit of opacity. Just getting a little bit of the shadows on his legs from the reference. Okay, so I think I'm done with the loincloth part of it. I do think I want to fix the knife hilt here. Like I was saying, it sort of disappeared. So I've gotten a little bit of white gouache off of one of my pans, and it's not one of the colors I have out now, but it just happens to be in a nearby pan. And I'm fixing this knife hilt so it shows up because it's definitely sort of disappeared into his back here. So just adding a little bit of white to separate. And again, you can do this finer with a fine brush than you can do with a pen. So, and it's way more dependable than a pen too, as we have learned. I don't know if you guys got to see how I finished my bird that I did on last stream. It was a lot of fun. But I finished it and posted it on Instagram, so it looks a lot better finished up with the white than it did on the stream, because we did sort of a medley of 3 different pieces last time, and I sort of told myself I wasn't going to do that again either, because it takes so much time to should finish one piece instead of half finishing 3 of them, I think, is the conclusion I came to. Okay, so I think I'm going to work a little bit more on the cliff face now. So I'm going to go ahead and use the purple to develop the cliff, and it probably would have been a brighter idea to do the purple darker in the first place if I wasn't just sketching it, but it's alright, we can go ahead and render it now. It is going to take more time, and if I wanted to have done this in one step, then I could have applied the purple thicker. I guess I just didn't have enough time. Didn't have enough time to decide whether I wanted to do this as a grisaille or just as purple rendering. I'm also going to have my brush in one hand, so we can have that. Oh, and before I do the purple, probably a good idea, now that I don't have the dark there, is probably should go in and throw in more of that blue, shouldn't we? So I think this is actually going to be hard pressed to blend. It sort of sinks in, this color. So it can go either way, but let's try to do it the purple and then the blue, and if I don't like it, if it eats up the purple a little bit, then for the rest of the cliff we will do blue and then purple. But I think I can actually go dark and then light with this, because this color, like I said, is very staining. This color in this palette is super staining, so. And don't worry about applying it too dark, because as you can see, it sort of lightened up when you put the opaque blue on top of it. So it's one thing that we've learned, is that it really doesn't matter if it's a little bit too dark for using semi-opaque colors, because it will lighten up when you apply over layers to it. And I found that to happen for any grisaille. Any grisaille that I've ever done always lightens up because you have other colors underneath it if they're opaque. And if they're transparent, then it'll get darker, because then you're just adding more darks to it. Transparent darks, luminous darks, not chalky, semi-opacifying, muddying darks. So. Got a very quiet audience today, huh?
Yep.
I guess they all got scared or they don't like Tarzan, I guess. They don't have a big Frazetta loving audience this time.
I think unfortunately most of them are spending their time in the other stream.
They are?
A couple of them, yes. Ava and Diane just came over.
Oh, they did? Mm-hmm. What? Even this late?
Yes.
But how do we get to the other stream? I don't understand. What is the other stream?
I put the link on the other stream.
In the comment section?
Yes.
Okay.
You have a question. What are your thoughts on dagger brushes and cat's tongue brushes?
Oh, I love cat's tongue brushes, and I love filberts. I have mixed results with dagger brushes, because if its belly is too floppy, then instead of giving you a nice sort of, I would prefer an angled brush to the two dagger brushes that I ended up buying, because my dagger brushes are a little bit too floppy and they sort of have less control versus the cat's tongue brushes, which are like filbert brushes or similar to filbert brushes, and the angle brushes, I much prefer those because they give you a lot of sort of like this one, it's like a long angle. So it's just got a little bit of an angle there, and it's a lot more control, and you can let me do shading and stuff, versus some of the dagger brushes, they have a bigger belly, and then the angle that they sweep at with the cut is deeper, so when you paint with them, sometimes the control on it is worse. I cannot believe I still had people, where is the other, what's the other link? I don't understand how to fix that. Can somebody help me understand and leave a comment as to how that works? Because I don't know how that works. I've set up a few streams. This is like the third stream off of YouTube now, and I don't know how when I start my stream, it's not the stream I scheduled, and I'm losing people on the other page. It's horrifying and sad to me that there's people waiting on the other page when I've been streaming on here. Why is there another page? What parallel universe allows there to be another page when I'm streaming on here? That makes no sense. Poor Ava and Diane. Well, while you guys have been sitting there watching nothing, we were working on Tarzan, done by Frazetta on this page, so I'll try to figure that out for the next stream. I have no idea why that's so. The one thing I can say about Twitch was I went onto Twitch, I started the stream, and it was there. There was not like another place where there was people going on another page where there was a stream or something. I don't even understand how that works. Maybe the best thing to do is not to schedule the streams anymore. Maybe at least temporarily until I can figure that out. And maybe just start streaming, and then when people show up, they'll show up at 4:30 at this time. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how that works. I don't know how I schedule a stream, go to my streaming page and start the stream, and then realize that there's another page where people are waiting. Why does YouTube do this to me? I don't know. And if anybody has any help about how I can not do that anymore, please tell me, enlighten me. I am open to opinion and input, at least in this area. And in other areas too, but I'm kind of a jerk. So how many people managed to find their way here? Do you know how many people are here yet?
You have 8 watchers now.
Oh god, it's lower than last time. Is there some way to go back and tell other people on that page to come here?
Yes, I already did that.
Okay. Because that's like half how many we had last time. And for such a hard subject, too. Like, here I am, slaving away, doing Frank Frazetta, and people are not here. That's so sad. Well, it's an easy Frank Frazetta piece. I'll give him that much. We decided not to start in with the harder Frank Frazetta pieces because, like I was saying to you guys earlier, I don't think I've done any muscular dudes yet on my live streams or maybe even my YouTube channel. So as much as I like to do comic book type pieces when I was younger, I haven't really done them on YouTube yet. So I don't really know that my audience is expecting that or prepared to draw muscly dudes, so. Well, Moon made it over. How did Moon know where to go?
I guess we're just seeing who cares about you more.
That's Moon. Moon cares about me. Either that or she's like clairvoyant or something. She's a psychic, so she knew where we were, but I don't know. I don't know. You guys can figure out and try to help me with that. I don't know how that works on YouTube, and it's sad. It's sad that there's people waiting someplace else and we're over here. That part of it makes me sad for them, because it makes me sad for them expecting me to do this, and it makes it sad for me because I was expecting them to watch and then they don't know how to get their way here. And I don't think it's my fault or their fault. I feel really angry with YouTube for like making such confusing situations for this, but there are certain things that we didn't like about Twitch, and I'm sure when it comes to YouTube live streaming, there's certain things that I'm not going to like about that either. So, it is what it is. Well, if anybody has any questions now, apart from what the heck are you doing here, please go ahead and ask them. And if you have any light to shed on how to fix this situation in the future, and again, feel free to share.
Ava knows the answer.
Okay.
She said it's YouTube's fault.
But does she know how to fix that?
No.
Oh. But Ava has the answer to everything. Ava can tell me. She'll have some way of doing it. I'll bet you she'll figure it out before you do. It's alright. I'll have to do something. I'll have to contact somebody on YouTube or something at some point and say what is going on, and they'll get back to me. They're pretty good about getting back to people. I rented a old Ray Harryhausen movie over the weekend called Captain Sinbad, because we were sort of feeling the mood for like some stop motion Sinbad old type movie type stuff, you know, Golden Age type stuff. And we've already seen The Thief of Baghdad, we've seen Sinbad the Golden Voyage, we've seen some of those other Ray Harryhausen movies, so we thought, oh, I haven't seen this one before. And, you know, we'll watch this one. And it wasn't available for rent on Amazon, so we rented it off of YouTube. And it was like the most terrible quality ever. Like some of the screen was off the some of the movie was off the screen. It wasn't even all captured on the screen. Tried turning the captions on. Some of them were also off the screen. The audio kept going in and out. So we managed to just sort of sit through it and struggle through it. But after it was over, I emailed them and said, geez, this movie was terrible. And they gave me my money back, so I guess that's a much smaller problem to fix for $2.99 versus a live streaming issue, but I'm assuming that they will try to help me out. YouTube can be really crappy when it comes to some of these issues, though, I have to say. So I hope it's resolved by next time, or I figure it out on my own. At least I didn't stop recording my own stream this time like I did last time. Hey, last time we did that and it worked, so how did it work last time? Because last time we did the exact same thing. We went to Elgato and started the stream. Gosh, go figure. Okay, so while I've been kvetching about YouTube, I've gone and done some of this weird cliff face area here, and it does look like the purple seems to stick even underneath the blue and the yellow. So I'm definitely just going to go and make the purple darker in some of these other places because it seems to be working just fine. And the other thing I can't get over for the live stream, and the reason I'm going to complain about it is because it actually is important as artists for color, is that there's something going on with the color balance of this, that light colors like this paper look fine, but these darker colors lose a lot of their luminosity. And I mean, I can tell you because just even the color of my skin looks wrong. It has got like a neon weird darker something weirdness to it. It's just ruining the actual like color, the tan color that you're supposed to see in it, and it's doing that with all of my darker colors. And I don't know if other people who are artists are having that problem on YouTube live streams, but I notice when I export my movies through iMovie and through my camera, they have a much better color range than when I do a live stream, where all the darks get really dark, like including but not limited to my hands. They get really dark and really sort of solid dark without any of the lighter colors in them. And also the lights look fine, but the darker colors just get really blocked into a solid dark. It's like the live stream is kind of racist or something. I don't know. It's a bad joke. Alright, so we're working on just that lower part of it, and this is just going to be a lot of cliff building, and it's not going to take as long as it looks, and it's fun. I like cliff building. Just do more of those straight strokes that looks like there's a rock cleaving in a single direction. Try not to make too many curves when you're working on any kind of a rock face, and then angle off at the ends. It's what he's doing. So we're just looking at his master study, and that's one of the benefits of doing a master study, is you get to see how somebody who was successful and famous solved a problem, an art problem, a visual problem, and then you get to try to solve that problem on your own someday, but hopefully you will keep some of the information, and if you like something that they did, you can certainly use it. That's what people who went before you are for, so that you can also learn from them. Now, you can't do their pieces and then claim you did them on your own or sell them as your own. That's called plagiarism. But if you want to copy or use or utilize any of their style or, learn from it, you will develop a unique style of your own eventually. But in your learning stages, there's nothing wrong with really liking and using somebody's problem solving, somebody's way of problem solving something. And I'm actually a different person when it comes to my own style for color and mood than Frazetta is. He's got a very neon, sci-fi sense of color, and he's more about dynamic poses, and he definitely has a great limited color scheme way of spotlighting things. You'll see some of his paintings where he's got a girl, and she's the only girl in the painting, like in the John Carter pieces, when when John Carter is battling the apes on Mars, and she's got red and white, and she's the only person with a red cape and really white skin, and everybody else is John Carter is tan and golden, and the gorillas are like gray and all sorts of darker shadow colors and everything, and so she really stands out, and he spotlights her like that, and so you'll often see a spotlight area of red in that case, or you'll see it in in just a really light, a super light area, or a super red high intensity area, and he does that a lot. So that is a great tool that lots of people use, and you can certainly use that too. He's not the first person to do it, and he's not going to be the last, and it's a great tool to utilize. But he does have a great sense of action and composition, and he makes his figures sort of acrobatically short, sort of like they are those kind of acrobats with the low center of gravity, and they're all sort of shorter than they would be if they were drawn by certain other artists. But it makes them great at sort of leaping through the air or fighting with swords or something. So he himself was not the tallest dude, I think. I think he was also on the shorter side, although I'm not sure. Maybe it's just him being muscular looks like that, but definitely a lot of his figures have a low center of gravity and have that sort of acrobatic musculature and sort of not super tall, and it allows them to sort of jump through the air and do fighting stances and action poses in a way that you wouldn't be able to get if people were, you know, like 6'4" or something. Okay, and I think I like the darkness of that here. I'll come back in with the green and the blue and the yellow down here, and then we can move on. I do think we need a little bit more yellow. A little bit more blue, I should say, right here. It's definitely getting much more of a gouache look. Ava, I think you were doing opaque and transparent use of these paints on Instagram recently for a little duck gourd piece that you were using. And here today, as a result of seeing you do this, I'm already, I just wanted to use these colors because you brought them up and said, you know, yeah, they can be used transparently and opaquely, and look at how much you can do with them. So you can have a semi-gouache feel to some parts of this, where it's going opaque like this and then getting lighter. And in other parts you can have a more of a watercolor feel. And it's a nice diversity to these paints that way. And again, I did choose to pick up the colors apart from the purple that are the more opaque colors. So you can work on this with the more opaque colors and it will give you a gouache look. If you work on this, you know, with the more transparent colors, it'll give you a watercolor look. And it does tend to be a good tool, I think, to do with both. And I think, Moon, you were asking about the prangs, and I told you there's no way in heck I'm buying those prangs again, because if I ever did anything with those prangs, it would just be something that wouldn't last at all. You know, it has no, it would fade away really quickly. It's not, I'm sure, even if it's acid-free, it's certainly not archival in any way, and I'm not even sure if it's acid-free, but even if it was, it's just super student quality paint, because you can buy a box of prangs for $2 or $3, and you can buy the larger set for $5 to $10, $8, and it'll make a really pretty piece, and you can paint with it exactly like this is handling, but the problem is that these have some light fast ratings, and more expensive paints have even better light fast ratings. So this is going to last at some point. I'm putting all this sort of hand effort and work into it. I don't want to take a piece and work on it in prangs at this stage in my life, because I feel like if I'm putting some effort into something, that I want the piece to last. And that's not going to happen if you use prangs. But if you want to, you can see how I'm handling these, where I'm using it opaque in some areas and then thinner in other areas. That's exactly what I did with the prangs. And one of the reasons I did that is I didn't know that watercolor had to be transparent more of the time, at least traditionally. So I was using them however which way I wanted, and I used them opaque sometimes and transparent sometimes. And so if you do that with these, in that sense they'll behave very much like those prangs. And it's just a lot of fun to have a color like the purple, which is transparent and doesn't shift, and then to have the colors like this blue or the yellow that can be made really opaque, and they sort of work more like gouache. And it gives you a real sort of body to the cliff. And that's what I was saying to you guys earlier, which is it's going to take me like that amount of time that I'm spending on this cliff to work on the body and on the background, and it'll bring it up to that amount of realism. But it doesn't happen that quickly. You just have to work on it in real time. And I'm a pretty fast painter, but if there's a lot of detail, well, you've got to honor the detail if you want it to look like the actual piece. If you don't want it to look like that piece in the end, then, you know, you can work looser. But if you want to do justice to the study, then it's just going to take some time. And he loved these stupid greens and purples. That sort of like, you know, green is almost like mutant toxic ooze color and sci-fi aliens type color, and purple is also sort of magic, swords and sorcery type of, you know, color. So he used these colors a lot. I mean, it shows up in this piece, but it seems to be his palette of choice is like orange, green, purple. You see a lot of those colors, you know, it's sort of smoky, low intensity, but mixed with magic and sci-fi type mood. So it's really interesting, the kind of mood you get. And that's one of the reasons why I chose these colors, is because I thought, wow, I really want to affect that mood too. So, and I'm sort of hollowing out a little bit of these greens so it looks more like rock instead of leaving it all opaque like I did for the blue. It's because this green is actually more transparent than the blue or the yellow. So I'm doing what I did with the purple and playing up the qualities of this green to make it work more transparently and like do bleeds and blooms for the texture instead, which is it'll work well for this because it's a more transparent color. Get some yellow in there. I'll see you later, Diane. Thanks for showing up. Oh yeah, no, I think if you did use praying, you can have a lot of fun. And I think that for me, I mean, if you want to have fun and if you want to work with low-cost supplies, then I'm willing to work with certain supplies, but not with others. I think it took me so long to get rid of the prayings that I just don't want to ever get anything that low cost again, because I just know that I have put effort into my pieces and I want to know after the piece is done that it's going to last. But when it comes to you yourself or anybody else, you know, it depends on your budget first of all, but also if you want to have fun. I've worked with dollar store watercolors when I'm visiting my parents just for fun. Like if there's nothing else around, I'll just use whatever's around. So it's not like you can't practice with nice things. But they do have a starchy handling. So if you're not used to, I don't know if you work with tempera more, but they sort of handle more like that. If you do decide to try them out. I don't know if you've tried them out at all yourself, but that's what they sort of handle like. Okay, I like that rock face. And you can see the difference between, I'm going to turn it to the side so you can see the difference between the bottom part of the cliff and the top part of the cliff that we haven't worked that much off of yet. And what I'm going to do is probably just work a little bit on the branch and then work on the figure and then on a little bit of the scenery here so that we can, you know, get a little bit more of that done. Actually, I might not even work on a branch. I'm trying to figure out if I should go for the branch or for the figure. I think the figure actually has some nice work in it already, so I'm trying to figure out what would be more useful to you guys. See you later, Brody. Thanks for showing up. And of course, we'll also be doing other pieces that are Frazetta based in the future, because Frazetta's just a great, just like Muka, he's one of those people you can do a handful of pieces, you know, from him and just learn a lot. And I don't think this ended up being such a bad stream, except for that we sort of lost people on the other end, but otherwise it was a pretty decent stream. I'm sorry that we don't know how to get this stream so that other people know to come here, but I'll figure it out for a future. One way or another, you know, takes a few times. We have the same sort of things on Twitch, I guess. Yeah, I don't even really know what some of these weird bubbles that he drew on this trunk are. Some fantasy sort of, I guess it could be like mushrooms or toadstools. This is of course like some kind of shadow in the trunk, but some of these things you're not even going to know what he was doing, but we're just trying to copy some of his shapes, but I don't necessarily know. Like sometimes for some artists it's very clear exactly what they were drawing. Sometimes for some artists, like, and I've had this happen to me with Frazetta, because he does a lot of implication, where a lot of it is suggestion, it's implied, kind of like Berkey. If you ever look at, it's John Berkey, isn't it? Who did all those space scenes. I'm hoping I'm remembering his first name right. I know the last name is Berkey. I'd assume it's John for the first name. But he did a lot of these great space sci-fi scenes, and the scenes would always have, instead of having details super done up, there would be a lot of sort of like ambiguous shapes that suggested certain things. And it would end up looking more real that way versus if you try to draw in all the details, because inevitably you'd sort of end up disagreeing with some of the details or thinking that they weren't accurate or something. So never underestimate the power of suggestion. Suggestion texture and color and sort of ambiguous shapes that look right is so much better than trying to do stuff in some kind of weird, minute exactness that may not work out. Will I have time to do pre-edited uploads of originals? Clarify that question a bit more. You mean like of an original painting, like off of Instagram? Sometimes I post a progress piece on Instagram, and then I post the finished piece as it comes along. So I do that on Instagram if you follow me there. When it comes to YouTube, sometimes I'll show a piece that I'm working on that's an original, and then I'll show it later in another video and finish it off in the video, or just show it off in another video. So I've done that kind of stuff, but if that's what you're referring to, but I'm not quite sure pre-edited versions of originals. Do I not want to live the prang days? No, contrary. I might go back to the prang days and never come back if I go back to the prang days, because you know how drunk it feels to have like a $3 box of watercolors and like use it and it never runs out? That was like probably the best painting time of my life, was when like stuff was like you use just the cheap supplies and you didn't have to worry about like how much it cost, because literally you could just use it to death, and it just never ran out. I don't know what they put in that box of praying watercolors, but they also seemed to take a really long time to run out. So I think I only ever went through like 2 or 3 boxes in all of my years of sort of high school and middle school painting, and even I didn't even like replace them with better paints until after I graduated from college. So it's like for 8 years or like around that much time, I was using those praying watercolors, and I think, like I said, I only went through 2 boxes of them, and they were cool. And also there was no rules. I mean, you can't really bring that kind of time back when you're younger and you don't really know all the rules of stuff and everything, and so everything feels really fresh and new. And so when you guys I've seen a few of you guys say, oh, I wish I was at the level of painting. You know, I always want to be at a different level of painting. So you're never going to be at the level of painting you want to be if you're somebody like me who's like always trying to do better. But I wish I could be the kind of person that enjoyed being a beginner more, because frankly, the super excitement of like being a beginner and not knowing about like papers and paints and just sort of enjoying the idea of doing a really good sketch and then painting it up versus like knowing if stuff was archival or not, or you know what you should be doing or not that is going to be popular, and all of this other stuff, and also just like I said, the whole stress of materials is just, that's amazing.
Katrina clarified. She meant, are you going to do short edited videos, or are you only going to do
streams? Oh, okay. No, I have over the past 2 weeks since I came back only done live streams, but it's been my habit. I went back and counted actually my videos, and I've got pretty much 50-50. I've got, at this point, because I did so many live streams, I caught up. So it does seem like I've done a lot of live streams. I've got 50% live streams and 50% pre-edited, sped up videos that include originals and such. And even some of my live streams include originals. They just have to be like the easier ones. But the whole point is, yeah, I'm still going to be doing the sped up videos because they're just, the quality of the lighting is going to be better. Like I told you, there's something that happens with the quality of the lighting of this where it sort of blows up the darks a bit too much. And it's annoying to me. So if you go back and look, you can just set, like I said, a really easy gauge is you can look at the darks in this video, including the brown of my hands, and go look at the browns and the darks in any of my other videos, and they look more rich. You can see they look lighter, and you can see more colors in them. So, and that's why I'm probably going to always do that, because my camera is going to give me better footage than the live stream footage, even though this is decent. But I think that the other thing that it allows me to do is a custom voiceover and a project where I take my time and I basically can share other lessons with you. So I can share certain lessons with you when I'm doing it this way and other lessons with you when I'm doing it the other way. So I don't think I'll completely stop doing one or the other. I'll try to keep it at a 50-50 basis.
Moon wants you to please do a stream on it.
I'll think about it, Moon. I can't make any promises. I love you, and I've done a lot of the stuff that you've requested is always stuff that works out for me. So I've always done it, whether it's INKTENSE or somebody else requesting glass pens, or more INKTENSE or Gansai or whatever. I go and do all of that stuff. So I'm a pretty easy pushover when it comes to. I always say, well, I don't really take requests, and then anytime anybody asks for something, I always end up doing it. So who knows? This is probably going to work out in your favor too, but right now I have to try to hold on to some of my dignity and say that I'm not going to be buying prangs again. But of course, if you keep on insisting, I'll probably go and order a set of prangs. And it only costs freaking $3 for the small set. But the other thing I'm afraid of is like when I go back to use them again, that they'll handle like garbage. Because I've been so used to doing this for years now that when I go back to it, who knows, they might just handle terribly now. See, these are these growths that I'm doing here right now. What are these on the side of this cliff? Like carbuncles on this high up on a cliff? They don't look like they're knots in the trunk. And they don't look like they're mushrooms or any kind of fungus, although that would be my closest guess, is they're like some kind of flattened toadstool growing on the side of this. But he's drawn a whole lot of these up here, and they just look like they're alien, like they don't belong here. So I'm drawing them in because I see them in the study, but I'm trying to understand what they are, and I'm not quite sure what they are. They just is. They just is there, and I was drawing them in. Yeah, praying is better than most other kids' watercolors. That's why even as a not kid, I used them all the way up through high school. I'm shocked. I think some of my oldest pieces on DeviantArt, I stopped using DeviantArt like many, many years ago, like super many years ago. So if you go on there, you're going to see nothing but like pieces I did probably from high school and college because I used it like that long ago. But some of the pieces on there are done with praying watercolors. If I can find any images of them and put them in and show them to you in a video in the future, I will do that. And I will also consider getting some prangs. But seriously, these Gansai Tambi watercolors handle similar to what I thought prangs used to handle like when I was younger. So I'm not lying about that. They handle similarly. But yeah, I don't know what it is with the prangs. I think it's because whatever they do to make them opaque, like whatever the binder is, they seem to have a pretty high pigment load. So it doesn't just turn out to be like just starch, and they're not like super hard like some of those cheap watercolors where like you go and try to like wet them down and they're like really hard discs because they're like those really cheap watercolors that are made for kids. So I mean it is a good sort of children's brand watercolor. It really is. It's not a joke. If you want to start out giving your kid their very first watercolors, praying is not a bad option at all. Yeah, could you post a link of the reference picture again? Because somebody,
sure.
Yeah, there is a reference picture for this. This is if it's a master study done like ages ago, there's always a reference picture. So you can always ask me, and I posted at the beginning of the stream, but since we lost so many people at the beginning of the stream, I'm sure lots of people don't know what the reference is. So he's going to paste a link to that again, and you can compare it to what I'm working on here. And again, this is a Tarzan piece by Frank Frazetta. He's a Golden Age illustration master, working, all the way from, I think, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s time, I think even to some of the 70s. If I've got plus or minus a decade in the front or back, depending on how I got his age or time a little bit wrong, but around that time. It's really cool, the kind of style that he had, and you can learn a lot from him, from his color and composition choices. Those are the two stylistic things that I think he did so well that we can learn from, which is color and composition. Okay, I think I've worked on enough of that cliff, like I said, to feel like we can. And it's got such a cool sort of like rainbow feeling to it almost, because he uses such sort of imaginary colors. And again, you can choose to play them up or dull them down, you know. I've played them up or kept them the same or played them up a little bit in some areas. Okay, so I'm going to come back over to the left side of the painting, and I'm a little bit sad I didn't get to do more work on the torso area, and I just feel like we have to try to, has it been 2 hours since I've been streaming yet? It has, right? So I'm about to like wrap this up actually in comparison to where we're going. But before I go, I should try to at least fix this part of his hair, because I see that this part of his hair needs to be colored in, so his neck sits right on his head. That's got to be, and we didn't get to color in the stupid monkey either. So I feel bad about not getting to the stupid monkey. Well, we drew the stupid monkey on screen, but we didn't color him on screen. And I didn't get to darken his hair and all that, but I'm trying to figure out if there's what can really be done. It's already at 6:30, right? So I guess we'll just recap the piece, right? Alright, so we did a Frank Frazetta master study. We didn't get very far into polishing it, but we did get to start finishing up the purple under sketch that I did here, and also doing some of the media up to the middle, nearing the end layers of some of the watercolor glazing. And it's basically a lot of wet on dry with some wet on wet, and I didn't do a grisaille. This isn't quite a grisaille, this is more of a purple sketch. And one of the things that I wanted to point out that we want to look at is that he used a lot of triangles in his compositions and diagonals. So let me point that out again. His arms are making a diagonal right there. His shape is a triangle right here. There's another triangle between his arm and the legs right here. And there's another triangle going from the top of the cliff down here to this, the whole figure hanging off of this is like a triangle like that. Okay, so you can see the number of diagonals he's added, and yes, he does have amazing hair, and I do think that the hair is also, by the way, flowing at a diagonal, so you can, if you make sure you want to have any kind, if you want to get rid of static compositions, then include diagonals. If you want a peaceful composition, then use a lot of horizontals. If you want a peaceful but regal and sort of tense, slightly more tense composition, then use more verticals. But diagonals are all about energy, and he used those a lot. So that's one thing. The other thing is his figure is shorter and sort of fits in with the composition as a result of that. You can see that happen with not just him, who's foreshortened, but a lot of his other figures where he makes them sort of so that they are foreshortened to a degree that they work good in active compositions. Also, his color scheme is limited, and it gives a sort of fantasy sort of feel. So we were just layering with these colors. I think this original piece is a combination of watercolor and or gouache, and so we're doing something that was also using the Gansai Tambi colors, which are good for watercolor and gouache. So it's a pans that can be used for both. The 4 colors we used were the cornflower blue, this olive green, this light brown tannish color, and this purple for our shadow and our sketch. So hopefully you guys got a chance to enjoy what I did for the stream, and I do hope that we can figure out how to make sure people get to the correct stream link in the future and it's not as confusing. If you have any questions, do message me. I do think the chat box here disappears more actually than it does in Twitch. So if you have any questions, then go ahead and message them to me, or text them, or leave them on my video page or on another video. After this video is posted, you can also post it in the comment section there. Okay? So thanks for joining me on the stream. Really appreciate you guys coming. Sorry that there was some confusion. Hopefully we'll fix it for next time, and I'll see you next week in other videos, hopefully. So until next time, wishing you guys all epic painting adventures.